Hello, everybody. So I hail from across the border. I hail from Mexico City. And I am going to tell you in very brief time one of the adventures of Laboratorio para la Ciudad that I've been heading for the last 5 years, which is officially the experimental arm / creative think tank of the Mexico City government reporting to the mayor. So the lab is particular in many ways. As you probably know, there's a family of gov labs out there nowadays, and we try to deal with this paradox that on one hand, we want government to be very solid and sure-footed, but on the other end, we also want great ideas, as the ones that we've been hearing today, to be able to come into government. So that is where laboratories usually stand, as a safe place where we can take risks, where we can try different things out. Another particularity, it's a young team, incredibly multidisciplinary, where urban geographers work hand in hand with artists, political scientists, designers, historians, writers, et cetera, et cetera. And we also function as a bridge with civil society. Participation and engagement is our daily bread. As a good lab, we work in experiments. And so we've done everything from bringing in young people to work during 9 months with different city departments. We've also been working on the participatory budgets of Mexico City, which is about 50 million a year and more than 27,000 submissions every year. So it's a huge challenge, and we really do think that this is an amazing way of revitalizing the city. And this is the experiment, one of our latest experiments actually, that I wanted to tell you about today, the Mexico City Constitution. So, a constitution, we've been finding out in Mexico City, is an amazing space to basically be able to revisit what the city has become. No small feat in terms of Mexico City, which is the oldest city in the Americas, so it's almost 600 years old. And besides, it also has been incredibly progressive in much of its policy. So the other challenge is the diversity of Mexico City. This is Mexico City, but this is Mexico City, and this is Mexico City, and this is Mexico City. Mexico City, 21 million people in the metropolitan area, 9.5 city proper, 6 million people coming in every day. Anything you talk about is superlative. We have almost 5 million kids, which I believe is the population of Finland. In the metropolitan area, 5 million people riding the subway. So that poses a challenge because one of our hugest resources in the city is this very diversity, but the inequality is also one of our hugest Achilles heels. The Constitution has also been a long time coming because since '85, when we had a huge earthquake that devastated the city, about 10,000 people dead, the federal government disappeared, and people started saying, we need local representation. We cannot be another, federal government department. We really need to upscale our independence. So since '85, we fought first for the first Mexico City government that happened in '97. So believe it or not, Mexico City as a city government is just about to reach drinking age in the US. So it's a very young city, and in that time, to be honest, we've become one of the more progressive cities across the Americas in terms of public policy. So then why is it that suddenly, when we're getting our Constitution, which is the next upgrade, still further independence from the federal government, why is it that there was a social cry out of saying, this is not what we want, this is not fair? So since this was a huge negotiation with the national government, one of the things that happened is that they ended up placing on the table many of the rules of engagement, which basically, to sum it up, because it's a long story, meant that 60% of the Constitutional Assembly that was supposed to give us that DNA for our future self was actually elected popularly, which is a good thing, but 40% was actually designated. And the PRI, which is the federal government right now, more leaning towards the right, which has actually never ruled Mexico City since independent, had a representative majority that was not necessarily in tune with our DNA. Another huge fact is the mistrust that is rampant across Latin America. If you see the numbers, only 12% trust their deputies in Congress. These are the numbers, and this is what we had to work with. So one of the very first things that happened way before the lab came in and we came in was that the mayor announced that there was going to be a group of 28 people working on this Constitution, and their place was to actually know that they represented a city as diverse and as complex as Mexico City. An amazing thing, because we have everything from people that had been former gang members that are now doing the exact opposite and bringing people out of gangs. We had people like the first gay marriage in Mexico City that happened when we passed the the gay rights, marriage. We had people from academia, social activists, et cetera, et cetera. So it was incredibly interesting. But one of the things that was not happening is that we were not engaging younger voices. Like, people did not think that this actually had something to do with their daily life. So I found out one morning, reading the newspaper, which is sometimes what happens, and then I get a call from the mayor's office that the mayor had just entrusted us to create a methodology to bringing other people, especially the young voices, into the making of the Constitution. So off we went, a digital platform. We were able to create a space where you could form your own group, bringing your ideas, put them up on a platform, have other people comment. We had about 120 people signing up for these working groups that got put up on the platform. All of this information was actually distilled by my team and the team of the General Attorney of Mexico City and given back to the working group. And then we also said, can we meet people where they already are? And we also ganged up with change.org, which has about more than 5 million people signed up across Mexico, and said, can we place some rules of engagement where people can rally for their ideas and that we can actually help them mature them, because we know that a petition sometimes is a simplified form of a really great idea. Can the ones that go over 5,000, can we work with them to make them even stronger? And so basically this was an incredibly interesting exercise, because we ended up having more than almost 500,000 people following the platform, almost 300,000 individual signees, 14 petitions that went over 10,000 and 50,000 petitions. This is actually Francisco. This is the first meeting that he had with the general attorney, because his petition had gone over 10,000. And it was incredible because there was a degree of like, everybody was nervous about these meetings. Bernardo from my team, who's in the back, who used to work with him, was telling us that he was actually, both of them were incredibly nervous. Francisco, because he had to present his idea to these public officials, whereas a public official was incredibly nervous because Francisco now, by that time, represented 40,000 individual signees. And it went incredibly well. The people that actually went over 50,000 got to meet with the mayor himself, which is right there, who really, I think, showed a great amount of leadership in terms of opening up this conversation and really letting it run through citizen hands. And the happy story is that 84% of the original draft was approved by qualified majority in the final constitutional text. And so we have all of these petitions, except that very, very sad face that someday we will do something about, that actually made it into what could arguably be the most important document coming out of Mexico City since its inception. So these are, as I mentioned, a little bit of the numbers. And it was incredibly interesting to see that it garnered a lot of international attention and imagination, because it's probably the first crowdsourced constitution in the world, again, under a very complex scenario. But possibly the most exciting thing was the people behind it, such as Patricio, who was not 18 years old yet, when he actually had almost 20,000 supporters behind him, and now his ideas in the Constitution. Because the City of Service team visited Mexico City, we found out that most of them have actually become social activists, and now they're knocking on the mayor's door, because we're in elections right now, and saying, I represent 40,000 people, 50,000 people, and this is what Mexico City needs, and this is what we want to do with you. So it's been incredibly interesting that many of them stepped into this process and into this context, almost saying, okay, this is an easy thing, I can do a petition. And then it turned out that they thought, okay, this is actually hard work, I have to really get my hands into it, and then they've become activists of their community. So we've been incredibly interested in this. The other tool that we made for the Constitution was, how can we start thinking about the subjective city? How do we bring in even more voices into the thinking of our Constitution? So we created a survey called Imagine Your City, and we surveyed almost 32,000 people across Mexico City, asking them, what are the 3 first words that come to mind when you think of the city? What are the things that excite you the most? What are the things that hurt you the most? How do you imagine the future of Mexico City? What did the government have to do to get to this future, and what did you have to do, giving a little bit of sense of agency? And now we have a fantastic tool that we've been using quite a bit at the lab, where you can basically traverse the city and find out what the biggest challenges are, neighborhood, by gender, by age, by a lot of variables. And this has been an incredible tool because we really need to think that cities are not only their objective self, they're also the subjective city that lives in our heads, the way that we relate to them and the way that we feel we belong. It was also both fascinating as well as sad, to hear that even though we were prompting for positive futures, we were getting mostly apocalyptic versions back. So what do we do about this when we're government? Does government also have to think about urban futures? Do we also have to be part of that makeup of aspirations and desires of a city? And I think I'd say yes, I think we do. To gather these things, because we know about the digital divide, we had an amazing group of students helping us out across the city. And some of the most exciting things to come out of it, both the original 28 working group, the whole digital platform and everything we did with the urban imaginaries, are some of these things that you have here. So now Mexico City, once the Constitution is passed, which is quite soon, will have direct democracy, the right to technology, euthanasia, medical marijuana, plurality cultural capital, the right to sexuality and sexual diversity, diverse families, the right to care and caretakers, et cetera, et cetera. And possibly the one that excites me the most, the right to the city. How can this city be for anybody and everybody, be it that you're a 3-year-old girl, a single mother, a 60-year-old man? And it's also given us at the lab a fantastic excuse to create new tools to understand this megacity in its micro-territories. So this is one example where we can nowadays cross the concentration of kids per block, cross that with the access or lack of access to public and open space, and that with the indexes of inequality across the city. And so that's giving us hotspots where we can start both doing things in the present term, such as creating play streets, such as creating different type of topographies for playgrounds that also bring in a whole new neighborhood social interaction. And one of the things that excites us the most, how do we go from laws to really creating other type of urban and social realities? So we've also ganged up with the University of Mexico City. The mayor signed out with 5. And we've been working on things such as artificial intelligence for the buses that actually cater to some of the most impoverished and marginalized communities across Mexico City. We've also been working on bringing technology to an amazing program that Mexico City has, where there's more than 500 doctors that place house visits to people that cannot afford, because of pay or because of any type of disability, to visit a hospital. A doctor will go to you for free. And we're bringing in technology so we can do things with this data, and academia is actually working on this. All of these things came out of the urban imaginaries and the things that people said that were most direly needed. So I think probably the biggest lesson for us in terms of the Constitution was this question: what type of society do we want and how do we get there? Beyond services, beyond practicality, beyond efficiency, I do think that right now cities have a great opportunity to start thinking about who they want to be in the world. Thank you very much. And now I believe we have a little bit of time for questions, if anybody has any questions out there.
Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. I'm Brittany Drew Lane with the Open Government Partnership. And I was wondering if you could speak about how you're going to take the Constitution and alter the way that departments within the city works. So I recognize there's a lot of sort of policy changes. So we're talking about rights within the Constitution. So how are you going to make that transition? And what role has your laboratory played to sort of reach out across the various agencies within the city to get them on board before they have to actually change the way they work to align with the Constitution?
Absolutely. So first, caveat, the constitutional process is huge. It's especially huge because of exactly what you're saying. This is actually going to be a complete revamping of the way the administration works in many ways. Like the boroughs are becoming, I mean, the thing is, it's legal terms in Spanish, from delegaciones to alcaldías. There's going to be a different set of powers where there's actually going to be commissions in every one of these alcaldías. And this was the job of the experts, to be honest. Like, we were more in charge of basically bringing in voices, of imagining what type of city we want, of very specific ideas and subjects. But there's everything from, let's say, the institution of planning that is happening, which is actually huge news for us because we don't have one. I know places like New York have had one for a while, where we can finally have non-politicized agenda from here to the next 30, 50 years for Mexico City, because social inequality is huge, and we really need to start thinking about spatial justice. So how do we think about the way that the city develops? How do we bring in these tools? The role that we will have in that is, because of the type of tools that I showed that we've been working on in the urban geography department, we're preparing our white books hand over of things that we've seen, especially in the agendas that we're in love with, such as what does it mean to be a kid in the megalopolis? Because to be honest, it's an invisible community. And again, like there's 5 million kids in a metropolitan area, and we're not planning the city for them. Why not? So it's gonna be more on those small interventions. The big kind of like restructuring is actually on many people's tables and was the work of a lot of experts that were brought in to revamp the Mexico City government, especially when it went off to the Asamblea Constituyente, to the Constituent Assembly, where there were 100 people, 60% elected, 40% not, as I mentioned, that were working on precisely those types of questions.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I'm interested in Patrino, the young man, and his involvement. You said that he was kind of organizing and getting involved, and is there any other kind of aspiration that he will have, maybe elected office or any other thing? Because it's easy sometimes to be that organizer, but to get knee deep and to get involved in it, sometimes young people like to stay on the margins and want to be activists. And so sometimes it's really about getting the activists to become part of the very thing that they had a hand in.
No, absolutely. To be honest, this is one of the things that excited us the most. And it also taught us that many times a very low entry, a barrier to entry, actually can help as a Trojan horse that will then spur a lot of commitment and a lot of time invested in this. When we got together with them about a month ago, we were hearing about tales of what happened since then. And the first realization was that they felt so much responsibility because all of the people that had backed them, like they all tell the tale, there was like, oh, well, put up a petition. And then suddenly they have 50,000 people that are following them. And what does that actually do to your brain in terms of the commitment that you show with the city and the people that follow you, as well as the strength of your idea? So 2 other stories besides the one that I told you. There's also Nivia, who's a 60-year-old woman that is all gung-ho about animal rights. And now she has also about 50,000 followers, which is probably more than many congressmen, actually. With the push of a button, she can rally, and things have happened already, even before the Constitution. There's now an animal hospital in Mexico City that caters, just like a public hospital would, to humans. And this is because not only her, a lot of other people ganging around, but it does show the potential. Another beautiful story is a young man who's still in university right now. He actually switched careers and decided to go into politics. And all of this because he was the leading, he led with a little bit over 60,000 signatures, if I remember. And this changed his life. So I really do think that rethinking how people engage and meeting them under their own terms is incredibly interesting. One of the reflections that we've had at the lab is there's a very huge paradox, I think, not only in Mexico City, but beyond, which is we're seeing every time more mistrust in normal political processes, such as voting going down. And on the other hand, we're seeing more people wanting to engage with their communities. So how do we deal with that paradox? How do we have government be that place where you sink your hands into the city, instead of thinking that you're engaging with these rigid, boring processes, and as was said earlier, make it fun and playful and interesting and engaging. So I see my zeros flashing, so I'll end it with that, but thank you.